Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk, recording the earliest episode we've ever recorded, 10:20 a.m. More importantly, though, this is episode 100.
Woo!
Yay! Episode 100. It is pretty much meaningless to us as it is to you. So, no, but I mean, we've been doing this for 100 episodes. It's a good mile marker.
Congratulations, Mark.
Hey, you too.
Thank you.
That's 100. That's all. I mean, I'd say, how many episodes have we done together? Probably like 90, 93, 92, something like that.
Yeah, at least.
Most of them have been, maybe 95. Most of them have definitely been the two of us. Maybe a couple have had some guests on there in substitution, a couple solo episodes, but we have been chugging strong for about a year and a half now. And so thank you for listening, making it worth recording. Although even if nobody was listening, we would just do this anyways because we love hockey and we like to talk about it.
That's true.
So we talk about it in front of a microphone or at a bar. So why not in front of a microphone? So on today's show, to celebrate our 100th anniversary, our 100th episode anniversary. No, we have not been going strong since 1918. It's
quite the feat.
When the NHL begun, that's when our great grandfathers got together and recorded the first radio show.
Right. Back when Seattle used to have a team.
What do you think of Cy Denny? Joe Malone out there, eh? Scored 7 goals last night. I think they should be able to pass the puck forward. That was a real thing.
No, it was, yeah.
So
it's just funny.
Well, so today's show, we're going to go through every team in the NHL, kind of just do some quick hits. And as we go into Christmas time, what all these teams could use for a Christmas present. You know, that's so whether that be a trade, whether that be a free agent signing, maybe it's a coaching firing. You know, maybe that's as good as a trade.
Sometimes it is.
I think you saw it in Philadelphia. I think that it was as good as a trade.
And in Edmonton too. My goodness.
Yep. Oh yeah, for sure in Edmonton, absolutely. Yeah. Ken Hitchcock was a nice early Christmas gift, like a Thanksgiving gift for them. They've been rolling since Hitcher came in there. So we are going to just go down the standings from top to bottom. Usually we start at the bottom, and now we're going to start at the top. And we will. What kind of criteria did you use, or will you use, to determine what a team needs?
Well, I kind of focus in on every area of the game, right? So look at the defense, look at the forwards, goaltending, and really just kind of weigh it, and throw in the coaching, throw in the GM, whatever have you, and say, man, where do they need the most help at? What would be most beneficial for this team right now?
And that's why we're starting at the top, because that's the easy part.
It really is.
I mean, Tampa Bay is 8 points up on everybody in the league. 56 points to Toronto, and Winnipeg's 48. So, I mean, you look at Tampa Bay in first, Los Angeles in 31st. Tampa Bay has more than double their points. That is impressive. At this point in the season, that is impressive. A plus 45 goal differential, and they've scored 18 more goals than the next team. Over the course of only playing one extra game, that's very impressive as well. 15-4 at home and 12-3-2 on the road. 9-0-1 in their last 10 games.
Yeah, not too bad.
So
could be better, but
could be better. Could be better. They might have not lost that one game in OT. But anyway, so let's start off with the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Steve Yzerman built team that someone else is going to get credit for when they probably win the Stanley Cup. What does this team need? Maybe it's not what does this team need, because in reality, you look at them and they don't really need much. But what would this team like? Honestly,
to me, a backup goaltender. I like Louis Domingue. He's all right, but 19 games and .904 save percentage, literally a 2.99 goals against average in that span. And I think for a team that has this kind of offensive firepower, and for a starter, Vasilevsky, who's been known to, maybe get a little fatigued. He's got, had a couple injuries over the last few seasons. I think it would be beneficial for them to have, a more reliable backup. I think that'd be a great Christmas gift for them.
Okay. Yeah. You can't disagree. Although Louis Domingue, despite his statistic line, he is 15-4.
That's true.
So, he's at this point, he has he's up there with the tops of the goaltenders in wins, and he played fine when
he was good enough
when Vasilevsky was out, but they did put up a lot of goals while he was down, and I mean that just goes to show though that this team, they're able to go, all right, well, we don't have the all-world goaltender back there for us right now, and so we need to score more goals, and they rose to the occasion. What I think that this team could also use is actually a little bit of adversity.
Oh.
More than just a goaltender going down. It seems to me that when a team rolls through the regular season, I mean, hey, there's been a team that won 62 games in the regular season and didn't make it past the conference finals. So, 96 Red Wings.
Yeah, we won't talk about that.
So, to me, I think a little bit of adversity, not in injuries, but just in, teams come prepared to play you, or you get into kind of just the humdrum of the season and you go into a little bit of a losing streak, or maybe goals are harder to come by for whatever reason, and to fight that and snap through that, I think can pay dividends in the playoffs, because then you get into the playoffs and goals are going to dry up at some point. It's just inevitable because teams clamp down so hard, and so I think you want to see this team have to win some 1-0, 2-1 kind of games, as opposed to a lot of these 5-4, 4-2 types of matches. And so I think adversity would be, teams really showing up and giving Tampa Bay everything they have. I mean, I just look at, and maybe it's just Tampa's so freaking good, but you have a team like Toronto comes in. They're the second place team in the league right now, and Tampa was able to really just score on them at will at a couple points, and really Toronto had outplayed Tampa, but Tampa got a couple goals where they maybe shouldn't have, and Leafs made 4 mistakes, and all 4 of those goals Tampa scored on. I mean, when you look at this team, their top scorers: Kucherov 15.5, Brandon Point 22.3, Steven Stamkos 17, Tyler Johnson 18.2, and Yanni Gourde 15.2%, Anthony Cirelli 14.5%, Matthew Joseph 16.4%, and Palat 13.8%, Cedric Paquette 19.5%. I mean, those are some high shooting percentages, and those will come down.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that's, to me, you just want to see them kind of fight through some of that.
Let's remember, too, that game against Toronto, Vasilevsky stood on his head.
That is true. That is true. And that is
career high in saves.
That's the other, that's the other side of it, is that when you do have a guy like that, you can have an off night and it's okay. And that's usually the difference between a great team and a good team.
Right.
Okay, well, let's go to the Toronto Maple Leafs, where I think this answer is maybe a little more obvious. Since, I follow the team very closely.
Yeah, you go first.
I'll go first. Obviously, everybody knows that this team needs another center. That's a joke. That's a joke. Because Austin Matthews and John Tavares and Nazem Kadri is not enough. And this team needs a top 4D. Preferably, they could use a top pairing defenseman. But really, what team in the NHL outside of Tampa Bay isn't like, well, yeah, we would love to have another top defenseman, top pairing D-man. But I think a top 4 defenseman is what the Leafs need. And when you go down the list of guys available who have been thrown out, a Colton Parayko and Alex Pietrangelo, their names have been floating around a lot. Jay Bouwmeester's another one, which I just don't.
I wouldn't touch him.
I don't know if that's that's a guy that you want. I did see somebody suggest Alex Edler. I can't remember who it was on Twitter. It was an article on TSN, and they were talking about, maybe Alex Edler would be a good fit. And I remember writing an article way back when I was writing for Hockey Buzz for the Florida Panthers, and I suggested that Alex Edler would be a good player to come from Vancouver to go to Florida, because Florida could use a player like that. And I remember just getting blasted because people were like, Alex Edler's never leaving Vancouver. He said it. He's never leaving.
Right.
And people just I was like, I'm sorry, it's just an idea. It's okay. But from the vibe that I've gotten, Alex Edler moving anywhere seems very unlikely. He also has a full no move. And my guess is that playing in Vancouver is pretty fun right now, even though they're not necessarily winning it a ton. They're at least a more highlight kind of team. They do win some good games, some high scoring affairs. And I think that Alex Edler would rather probably be a part of the solution rather than just being dealt off. Although you got to think maybe they go, look, like we'll gladly sign you in the offseason. We'll bring you right back, but let's trade you and get some assets. I don't think that he would go for much more than mid-round picks at this point. Maybe a second-round pick. I can't imagine he gets more than. What didn't Evander Kane? He only got a second-round pick at the deadline, right?
No, he got a first.
Did he get a first?
It was a conditional, but
who was it that only got a second-round pick last year at the deadline? I can't remember, but anyways, I don't think that he would go for a first unless the price was driven crazy high. But I know other names thrown around like a Nicholas Kronwall or maybe. I mean, I guess you could say, well, the Leafs are going to not be able to sign Jake Gardiner, and so maybe just their acquisition for the offseason or for the playoffs is the fact that they're going to keep their UFA. I don't know. I think that they have to go out and try something though. So
yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think D is where, or the Christmas wish list would be. That would be at the top for them. Now, like we talk about, Jake Gardiner, right? I think because of the contract situation, he most likely won't return. Because I do think he's gonna get a little bit more money in the free agent market, and I don't think Toronto's gonna be able to keep him. However, I think what would be really interesting to do would be to move somebody with a little bit of money who could viably go to a team that, for instance, like I'll kind of segue this into the number 3 team in the league, Winnipeg, for example. I believe that their top priority, on their wish list, would be to get a number 2 center. Somebody who can play with Patrick Laine, someone with speed, a good two-way game. And I think for Toronto and Winnipeg, a good matchup would be a Tyler Myers / Kadri swap.
But then who does that... See, the Leafs have had kind of trouble filling the fourth-line center spot.
Right.
Par Lindholm has been okay. But if they were to deal Kadri, then that really leaves you with a hole in your third line.
No, I agree. And I think maybe if you do it early enough, you have time to go out and maybe first off see if maybe, you can fill it internally. And then if not, you can try to make a move before the deadline to get somebody, not necessarily anybody of high value, but, maybe you could go a little bit further down to, who would be, a good plug in there.
A center.
Maybe go. I don't know. Maybe go to Chicago and see if you can't, give him a 4th-round pick for Marcus Kruger or something.
Yeah,
I don't know,
maybe you can. I mean, Kevin Hayes is a free agent at the end of this year.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe throw a 2nd-round
Rangers.
pick at that. But
he's got 27 points in 33 games, but that's playing on a bad team, playing a lot of minutes. So
right.
There's some possibilities. I don't see. And Eric Stahl would be a great acquisition at the deadline again. But
yeah, that's going to be tough. I think if Minnesota doesn't get a deal done, they're going to move him because I still don't see Minnesota being a playoff team. So
yeah, and when we shift to Winnipeg, I agree that it's the Paul Stastny that came in last year that really put that team up and over the top. Probably what allowed them to beat Nashville, and unfortunately, I still don't know how Vegas beat Winnipeg last year.
I don't either.
I think Winnipeg goes to the Stanley Cup Finals. They probably beat Washington and they win the cup if they could have gotten past that team. So, so it's like they need to refill the hole that they lost by losing Stastny. And Eric Stahl would be a great acquisition for them too. If Minnesota isn't in the hunt come the end of it, they're how many points are they back? They're 8 points back of the division and 3 points back of the wild card. So I highly doubt they're giving up yet. But they're 3-7 in their last 10. They're really struggling away from home, 7-9, and they just can't seem to. They're a very middling team,
Yep.
And that's exactly what we predicted them to be. And so does a team like Winnipeg, who really has kind of become a rival for them, but does that make sense to start trying to look for a home for Eric Stahl? And maybe do we see his name pop up a little more here? I mean, even a guy like Eric Fair, who can play in that fourth line, he's doing all right. He's got 9 points in 34 games so far this season. So, I mean, playing limited minutes, but a guy who can step in and fill out the rest of your lineup. I mean, I think that there's some options that a team like Minnesota has, and new management there, and we'll see what they ultimately end up doing. But Winnipeg definitely needs that top six forward. I think that's really what it is. Just if they can add a top six forward, they go from being one of these teams that's kind of in the second group of really good teams to maybe being able to compete with Tampa Bay, because I think they do have the defense to compete with Tampa Bay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Bufflin the other day got a breakaway. Did you see that?
Yeah.
It was I didn't know he had those kind of wheels left.
I mean, I think that defensively speaking, you go, all right, Winnipeg, Nashville, and Tampa Bay are kind of in the same grouping together.
Sure.
And then it really falls off. I think it falls off significantly from there, because most teams don't have that great, all three lines of defense having a really good player on it is just very rare in the league nowadays. And so maybe San Jose, you can make the argument, but and with having Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson, if Erik Karlsson were Erik Karlsson of like 3 years ago, then we'd be talking. But
yeah.
Okay, well let's move to
the Flames,
the Calgary Flames.
Yeah,
the Calgary Flames.
Surprising to see them this high in the standings, to be quite honest.
I'm excited about it.
It's good. I like it when you kind of get a little shakeup every year where there's like one team that just surprises you, and another team that obviously disappoints you. But like last year with Colorado was great. I loved watching that top line just roll through. Sure. And this year it's great to see Calgary get their mojo going. Love watching Tkachuk and Monahan and Gaudreau. Those guys are fun to watch.
Yeah. So what does this team need?
For me, this team needs a James Neal to catch fire. That is at tops for them right now.
7 points and 3 goals in 35 games.
Yeah.
That's a disgrace.
For the money they're paying him, and I think that third line could definitely use that offensive boost. I mean, not to say it isn't producing very well, but when you're paying that guy to produce for you and he's not really doing it, let's get her going there, James Neal, and this team could really be a threat in the playoffs if they were able to roll 3 solid forward lines like that. Yeah,
yep. I can see that. I think the other thing that this team could use, man, the goaltending is strange because, David Rittich has come in. They've both played 20 games. Mike Smith has started 19. David Rittich has started 17. And, I mean, Mike Smith has been the inferior goaltender all year long. But it's almost like they keep trying to push Mike Smith back into that starting spot. Like, all right, you're our guy. Right. Wait, no, you're not our guy.
Bill Peters, get it together. He's not your guy anymore.
I mean, at this point, it seems as though you got to maybe tip your hat towards David Rittich. But maybe it's just they're going to ride both these guys and see how they do down the stretch. I think that there does need to come some stabilizing moment at the goaltending position. And whether that's just some sort of shakeup on the defensive side. I mean, they did quite a bit to their top 9 group of forwards over the offseason, bringing in James Neal and a Derek Ryan, and that really changed the face of the depth of bringing in Elias Lindholm as well, who has 38 points in 36 games.
Not bad.
I mean, I think Elias Lindholm's career high in points, I think something like 45 points. Yeah, 45 points in 2016-17. He had 11 goals and 34 assists. So he's 7 points away from that, and he's played half the games. He played 72 games that year. So Lindholm's just found his spot, and they're using him really well. And so, yeah, it's just overall you think defensive help, but not necessarily a defenseman. But you just need somebody who can help keep drive the play the opposite direction. So whatever that looks like for the Flames, that's That's, I think, what they could lose. Also, I think out of any team at the top of the standings, this is the team with the most, them and Buffalo have the most potential to just go kaboom at any point.
Yeah, there you go.
So we'll see what happens there. Okay, let's go to the Nashville Predators.
The Predators.
The Nashville Predators. So Nashville has, we picked them to be high up on the standings, and they've kind of struggled lately, 5-4-1 in their last 10. But they just keep humming right along. Really, the biggest problem in Nashville, in my mind, is PK Subban, who's really struggled.
Okay.
And with this like weird injury, right? He's kind of, and so that's more what it's struggling in the sense that I think he's hurt. And there hasn't been much talk about it. Whereas, if we were playing in Montreal,
right, and
it'd be all over the place. But
that's similar for me. And I think my need for the Predators is just health in general, not just for PK Subban, but you got Philip Forsberg out right now. He's a few weeks away from being 100%. Well, just coming back in general. Kyle Turris has missed time, and so you haven't really.
Victor Arvidsson is out right now. Yeah,
you haven't really seen this
on
whole
my IR on fantasy.
Yeah. I'm still 10-0, by the way, but we won't talk about that.
Wow.
Yeah. So Nashville, to me, you haven't really seen the real Nashville yet because they haven't all really been healthy. It's kind of like Arizona last year, while like they maybe had 20 games where they had their whole entire D-core healthy together. So,
right.
The real Nashville Predators, what they could really do, I think, will be worth watching once they're all healthy. And so hopefully that comes sooner rather than later for this team because, they could make some waves in the standings. And
yeah, it seems like every team has a player who's averaging a point per game, and Nashville has none.
None, yeah.
Yet they're fifth in the league right now in points. And, even a guy like Philip Forsberg, who normally I think we'd say, hey, 22 points in 26 games, that's like a 60-something point season. It doesn't seem like it's good enough now.
No.
Like with what, 25 players averaging more than a point per game.
Forsberg is one of those guys, I look at him, and I always want more from him. I feel like he could be an 80, 90-point player every year, but he just, I don't know, maybe if it's the team around him, he just doesn't, like maybe Ryan Johansson just isn't a good enough playmaker for him, even though Johansson puts up good numbers.
Well, maybe it's just the system that they really try to roll all four lines, and so
sure.
It's definitely they're playing to win, right? Like, not that everyone else isn't playing to win, but Nashville really does not have a like, hey, let's pad our stats kind of feel. Obviously, when you look top to bottom, you've got most of their team has at least 10 points coming back, so they'll be fine. But what could they use? What could Nashville use?
Oh boy, just outside of the health factor, I think just man, I don't really know. I think the team's good. For me, it's just getting healthy, and I think finding a way to get guys going a little bit more offensively. And I think, like you said, maybe PK Subban getting healthy kind of jumpstarts that a little bit more, because when you got so many other players at a point per game right now, and you got teams that are scoring at goals per game average higher than they ever have been, it'd be nice to see Nashville pick it up. They seem to be like one of the teams that just isn't really scoring more goals than they're used to scoring, I guess.
Yeah, this is a team that I would love if Dallas has somehow found their way out of the playoffs by the trade deadline. This is a team I'd love to see acquire Jason Spezza.
Okay.
I think that he would be a great fit on this team. I think that he could just blend in the background. He could be that veteran presence. The way that you hear Tyler Seguin talk about Jason Spezza, I think that he could come in and just provide a little shift in the locker room.
I like it.
So we'll see.
I really like that.
Okay, let's go to the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Washington Capitals. They have scored the third most goals in the NHL, tied with the Colorado Avalanche, and just behind Calgary. Oh, I lied. Maybe like the fifth most goals. Yeah. Anyways, so obviously they kind of struggled a little bit early on, first 12 to 15 games, and then just really went on a roll here in the next 20, and they're 7-3 in their last 10.
Ovechkin is getting a hat trick every other game.
And you know what is amazing? Our last show, when we predicted the different position, I said I picked Ovechkin for the Maurice Richard, and I said it's because he's just going to go and get a bunch of hat tricks.
And he did.
And then he did.
He listened to the show. He heard.
He does. That's, Alex Ovechkin, friend of the show. So what does the Washington Capitals need in order to repeat?
I would like to see another good puck-moving defenseman on the back end. I think that's probably their biggest need, although that's easier said than done because finding good puck-moving defensemen are very expensive, very hard to come by. Teams will not give them up. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they go out and try to get, that Jacob Trouba from Winnipeg, even though if I was Winnipeg, I wouldn't deal him unless you're sending back a center, which Washington does not have any to send back. Although I have heard rumblings that Andrei Burakovsky might be on the market because Washington is a little disappointed with his production, 8 points through 30 games. So maybe there's a trade chip you could throw in to get a good defenseman. But maybe a Nicholas Kronwall comes over. He wouldn't be a bad acquisition, a guy who could play, in your number 4 or 5 spot, provide some veteran leadership. He can still move the puck a little bit, still put up some points. Good enough for you. But to me, that's their biggest need because outside of John Carlson, they're really not getting a lot of production from the back end.
I want to see this team go out and acquire Gustav Nyquist.
Ooh. Okay.
I think that you can afford at this point. You've now won your Stanley Cup. So, and I think there's something to be said about taking a shot at repeating. And in order to repeat, I think that this team needs to add an offensive presence, and Nyquist, probably the best scoring winger on the Red Wings. He's got 31 points in 36 games. He's done extremely well, and I think you give up your first round pick, and I think that's really maybe a first and a third for Nyquist. That's probably all you're going to need to give up. Not that that's
no, I don't. I think even a first could probably get it done.
So to me, well, and I think that some other team out there would go, well, we'd give a first for Nyquist as well.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think you're going to have to go a first plus a little something. Maybe it's a mid-level prospect. The Red Wings certainly could use a defensive prospect, and so maybe that's more what the Red Wings would like to acquire for Nyquist. But haven't heard anything about him being extended by the Red Wings. So you got to think that they're going to use him as bait here to help rebuild, which they could always bring him back.
Sure.
He's done well in Detroit, but I think that he could go and he could play on that second line with Kuznetsov
and TJ Oshie
and look real good. Or he can even play on that third pairing, that third line, and
Lars Eller
help to fill out the. Yeah, I mean, a Lars Eller, Nyquist, that suddenly gives you some 3 very, very dangerous looking options, and so that's who I'd like to see them acquire. Okay, let's go to the Buffalo Sabres, probably the most surprising team here in the top 10 so far this season.
Yeah, I would not disagree with you. I barely pegged them to make the playoffs, let alone basically be a bubble team. And man, that acquisition of Jeff Skinner, that first line, I read something yesterday. Eichel, Skinner, and Reinhart, that top line has scored a goal in, I think it's like 7 straight games, and they've scored 11 out of the last 13 goals for the Buffalo Sabres. So they're rolling. It's nice to see Rasmus Dahlin. He's starting to come into his own. You see him more and more every single game now. He's starting to look like that number 1 pick and starting to be that number 1 defenseman that this team is hoping he could be. But I think for me, I would like to see a little bit of depth at the forward position. I think, don't get me wrong, that top line's great. But once you get past that, Jason Pominville, he's 33 years old and he's still producing fairly well. Okposo, he's been okay. Connor Sheary, I wouldn't mind a little bit more out of him, and Middlestad as well. So I think maybe finding a little production for that secondary scoring would be great.
Yeah, I think as hard as it might be to move twice in a season, I think that Carl Hagelin would be a good player to identify for the Buffalo Sabres, because Hagelin has decent speed. Mm-hmm. And he can come in and he hasn't played great this year. He only has 5 points in 21 games. He's playing for a brutal LA team. And I think maybe given some new life, he might be able to, he gets put on that third line in Buffalo, gives him a little bit of depth, and he could come cheap.
Yeah, I agree. Fill in that terminated contract of Patrick Berglund's too.
So. There you go. So my other thing that I'd say for Buffalo is that if you can't get something cheap, be patient, because you're not going to win this year.
No.
And that's okay. This is a great evolution of your team. Just enjoy it. Colorado Avalanche, 19-11-6. They are scoring almost at will and 125 goals in 36 games. What do the Colorado Avalanche need in order to win a Stanley Cup?
To win a Stanley Cup, that might be a little bit more difficult to find. I think probably fill in on the back end a little bit. And keep that top line healthy, let's be honest, because they've been doing most of the scoring for this team. It's insane when you look at point per game for McKinnon and Rantanen. 1.61, 1.53 points per game.
Insane.
Just nasty.
I did see that Rantanen is the first player. How many? He has what, like 58 points?
Yeah, in 36 games.
And he had 58 and 35, I think.
Yeah, probably.
He just didn't get a point in their last game, which is weird. He was the first player since, there's since the 90s or the 80s or something like that. Mm-hmm. There's been all these players, or 88. There's been all these players who have had 58 points in 35 games. Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, and Sidney Crosby.
Oh boy,
all Penguins. And so he's the first non-Penguin player to do it since Gretzky or something.
Right.
Something since the 80s when everybody did it.
Goodness.
Colorado, to me, obviously, they need something outside of that top line. Come playoff time, someone's going to shut them down. It just happens.
Yeah, and Carl Soderberg's been all right, 22 points in 36 games. Much better than I thought he would be doing. But, that's Carl Soderberg. I mean, can you really rely on him to carry the load if, like you say, some other team shuts down that top line?
To me, this is where it's time for Colorado, it is time to make a bold move. They have been very, very calculated. Obviously, we saw that with the Duchesne trade. And hey, good on Joe Sakic. He got a king's ransom for Matt Duchesne. And to his credit, though, Matt Duchesne has proven that he is worth it. I mean, he's been a phenomenal addition for the Ottawa Senators. They would be in last if it weren't for Matt Duchesne.
Yeah, as long as they can lock him up long term, that's a great trade.
And it sounds like I think that they will. To me, two players, Jordan Eberle, Mark Stone. You go out and you do what you need to do to acquire one of those two players. Because my guess, Mark Stone, he's not re-signing in Ottawa.
Boy, and I've heard too that Duchesne is only going to sign in Ottawa if Stone stays there, because those two have such good chemistry together.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with Duchesne then. But Jordan Eberle, to me, he's not looked as good as he did last year. Mm-hmm. But Jordan Eberle could, I think, come up and really no attention would be on him in Colorado. He's played in that in the Western Conference before. I think that he would be a good fit, even if it was just as a rental. I think Jordan
wouldn't be
Eberle,
that expensive either.
He shouldn't be.
No.
I think you might have to give up a first round pick for him, maybe.
I could see a second and a prospect to get him.
Yeah.
Would be great.
That's fair. And I think that Colorado has built up enough to where that is a possibility. The other thing I'd love to see them do is just go out and get Artemi Panarin and call it a day. But
wow, that would be disgusting.
To San Jose, who maybe did all their acquiring in the offseason with Erik Karlsson, but what could San Jose use?
Boy, they could use the old Erik Karlsson. Let's just be honest.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I mean, he has been better. He did struggle quite a bit early on. I mean, 24 points in 36 games, only 2 goals, a 1.6 per shooting percentage. So, yeah, it's the whole shooting the puck at will from the blue line doesn't really work anymore for whatever reason. Brent Burns also a 3.4% shooting percent. I mean, between Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson, they have shot the puck 230 times, and they've scored 6 times.
That's awful.
So whereas Logan Couture has shot the puck 95 times and has 13 goals. Timo Meier 113 times with 18 goals. So, I mean, obviously those guys are getting into some better positions to shoot the puck, but there goes my point. These guys need to get in better positions to shoot the puck because of the whole shooting it from the point, which is what used to be when San Jose's power play was rolling and Brent Burns was up for the Norris, they were just feeding it back to him, and he was wiring shots in. And you had Joe Thornton down low, who was always a threat to make a great pass and was often feeding Brent Burns with those one-timers. And things have just changed on the power play, and you need to be a little more versatile than that. So, yeah, an old Derek Carlson. I like it for San Jose. Let's go to Anaheim.
Anaheim. Yes. This is a team that I think could use some scoring. And I've said it for years. I always thought this trade would happen at some point. It never panned out because Kenny Holland had always had an eye on Cam Fowler for the longest time, and now all of a sudden he's not going anywhere at Anaheim. But Gustav Nyquist to Anaheim to maybe bring back a little bit of defenseman, so, a younger guy maybe. I don't know, maybe a Josh Manson or somebody, but that would be my ideal trade if I was, Kenny Holland, to try to rip one of their D from them to help rebuild that D core in Detroit. But yeah, Anaheim, they need some scoring. I think, they've been getting a lot of puck luck lately. I don't know how they're winning games. They're an anomaly to me. How they're still at that top of a position in the West, I don't understand it. So
yeah, I think it's time to cut the cord on Jakob Silfverberg.
Really?
I think that he is a guy that, has been touted as, he could score 30 goals a year. And he's never going to score 30 goals. He may have a great shot. It might look great when he wires one, but it's time to cut the cord with Jakob Silfverberg. He's a free agent at the end of the year. And I think that you go out and you use Jakob Silfverberg and you find a team who needs that type of player. In my mind, Jakob Silfverberg is a third-line winger. So you go to a team that has some top-9 depth, or that needs top-9 depth, which obviously you do as well. But you can find a non-playoff team. Maybe Jakob Silfverberg could go in and if you worked it to where you said, look, like, where do you want to play? These teams are interested in you and they'll sign you to an extension, and you are able to go out and you can acquire maybe just a different-looking player. I just think that him as a player, he needs a fresh start. Maybe in Anaheim, he's just never going to score those 30 goals, but maybe he could somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe a team like New Jersey. They could use him.
And New Jersey and Anaheim have been known to make a deal.
A little bit.
So, okay, let's go to the Boston Bruins, who are 19-12-4 and 5-5 in their last 10, but they have won their last 2. Obviously, another team carried by their top line, but they've been missing Patrice Bergeron for almost half the season. So, what do they need?
Yeah, health would be great, but to me, I think they need David Backes to get going. 9 points through 30 games, not the kind of production you're hoping for out of a guy who's supposed to be really rounding out your top 9 forward group. Like you said, they've been getting production from their top line. David Krejci's been much better than he has been the last couple of years. So if you could get him to fill in that third line and really get some production, and then same goes for a lot of the younger guys like Ryan Donato, Danton Heinen, guys who, again, were supposed to be young guys that were supposed to come in and fill out that top 9. They just really haven't done it. I think that would be ideal for them to get these guys going somehow.
Yep. And even a Jake DeBrusk, really 12 points in 28 games. This team's just got nothing outside their top line. And so I think some of that has to do with, Torrey Krug hasn't been healthy all year. Charlie McAvoy has not been healthy. And Zdeno Chara has missed a lot of time. This team's defense core has been ravaged like I've maybe never seen before.
Right.
Where, like 5 of their top 6 defensemen were all out at one point at the same time, where Matt Grzelcyk was the only guy left over. And so I think that, yes, you're right. Health is the biggest thing. But you got to look at the core of this team and go, all right, Patrice Bergeron, there's no way that he's going to be this guy for maybe another 2 years after this, and that's the maximum. And you've got all these younger guys coming up who you've been touting as players who can make a difference, and no one has. No one has really made a huge dent when given the opportunity. And now's the time. Guys are out. Patrice Bergeron's out. Everybody's shuffled up the lineup. And to me, nobody's really risen to the occasion to where you go, oh, yeah, we'll be fine in the future. We've got this guy coming up. To me, Boston should be targeting Artemi Panarin. Panarin said he wants to live somewhere near the ocean. And I think that Panarin would look. I mean, as a Toronto fan, that's a terrifying notion to think that Boston could get a Panarin, and maybe he wants to go to a warmer oceanside city, but Panarin would be a phenomenal addition to that Boston team and give them a second line, because he could drive that second line all by himself. And suddenly you are in the likes of where Chicago was at one point when they had, Patrick Kane on one line and John Tavares on another.
Right.
And you just fill in and around them. And so I do think that would be, that's something that they need to consider bringing in somebody. Somebody's got to come fill in that top six. And what you do is you just use the players you have in your lineup to make that deal. You deal a Jake DeBrusk, or you deal a Denton Heinen or a Ryan Donato, and you package maybe a couple of those players together and add a first round pick. And I think you've got enough for Artemi Panarin, and maybe enough to actually tempt Columbus to make that move mid-season, because they may not get a deal like that in the, obviously they're not going to get anything in the offseason for him. And if they can go and acquire two players who maybe could play in their top 9 next year, along with a first round pick,
it's not a bad deal.
And to me, is Columbus going to win the cup this year? No, I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
So I almost think you have to. But
yeah, I don't think Columbus has got the firepower to get past Toronto or Tampa. So
yeah, that's fair. Okay, let's go to the Vegas Golden Knights.
Right. Vegas. Yeah. For me, I think my most pressing need would be to find a backup goaltender. Marc-Andre Fleury, he's been fine. They're rolling a little bit more lately. They've been getting better as of late. But
I mean, they were bottoms in the league, and now they're 12th in the league, which is fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But Malcolm Subban hasn't really been a backup goaltender. His numbers are pretty dismal. I believe he's sitting at like an .888 save percentage right now. And maybe a lot of that... Okay, yeah, so even worse.
0-5 in his 5 starts.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, the reason they're winning games is because they're playing Marc-Andre Fleury. Do you want to play him 70 games? No. I think even at his age, even though he's still in his early 30s, you still don't want to play Marc-Andre Fleury for 70 games. And I don't think any NHL team wants to play any goaltender 70 games now, but... maybe you go out and you try to acquire a Mike Smith, or maybe go after, Jimmy Howard even. I don't even know, but
it's not a bad idea. I think that what this team, it showed when Nate Schmidt was suspended early on in the season. I mean, that's when this team struggled.
Right.
And when you look at their record over the last 17 games, they have been much better. And since he's come back, they're securely in a playoff spot. So to me, it's not necessarily, Nate Schmidt is the difference. It's that they don't have a lot of depth on defense. And so, to me, my number one priority for this team, they have a great top 9. It isn't packed with one player that you're like, yes, that player's driving everything, but they do have a lot of really nice pieces in that top 9. I think it's the top 4 defense. You go after, even in just somebody to fill in your 5-6 could help. But if anything, this team really should be pushing to move one of their forwards. I don't think they should move a draft pick, because they just sent their first round pick, unfortunately, for Thomas Tatar. And so I think that this team should be using somebody in their top 9 to go out and acquire a top 4 defenseman. And that's maybe you use a mid-level pick or one of your prospects, but I just don't think that this team's prospect pool is deep enough to really do that. And so that's what I would do if I was Vegas.
Okay.
And let's go to the aforementioned Columbus Blue Jackets.
Oh, yeah. So here's a team that probably needs, in my opinion, a top 6 center. A center to maybe either anchor the top line or the second line, whichever you want to do. Don't get me wrong. I like Pierre-Luc Dubois. I think he's fine. Maybe not a top line center, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe not yet in terms of his numbers, but
sure.
I do think that you are pretty secure for one of your top 6 centers.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this team is cooling a lot on Winberg as a center for their top 6, and so I think
that's Vinberg.
Sorry. So, and I think again, I still don't see Panarin signing here with this team, and so I think right now, if you're going to move him and try to see if you can't get yourself a top 6 center. It's going to be very difficult because there's not a lot of teams that have top 6 centers they're willing to part with that would, don't get me wrong, any team would be more than willing to take on Panarin, but do you want to give up a top 6
How
center?
about this? how about, and this is going to depend if you think that he is a guy who could step in and do this for you. How about Nazem Kadri?
Okay.
Along with a first round pick, Nazem Kadri, a first round pick, and a mid to upper level prospect not named Rasmus Sandin or Timothy Liljegren, because I don't think that they're gonna, because their struggle has been on defense. I don't think that they're gonna move those guys.
No, and they expect one of those two guys to really fill in for Gardner when he's gone anyways. I think that's the idea.
Yeah, would be the idea. Would that be enough to get Panarin? Is Nazem Kadri that player you're looking for to plug into your? Let's say overall, like he's a top. He for sure is a top 9 center, absolutely. And I think on most teams he's a second line center.
I would agree with that.
Now it's going to depend. Are you comfortable with a Luc Dubois, Kadri, Venberg, top 9? Like there's your top 3 centers without Panarin now.
See, I think if you're Columbus, you're okay with the idea of maybe Kadri coming in and being your number 2 center. I don't have a problem with that. The only problem I have is from Toronto's side. Are you willing to give up a guy who you still have signed for a couple more seasons at a reasonable price
to me,
to get a rental?
To me, this is like we're going for it right now.
Sure.
Right. And I think that it allows you to re-sign Jake Gardner in the offseason because you don't have Kadri anymore. And then you're going to go out and you're going to figure out your options at center later on. Now, Pittsburgh's done it. They went out and they maneuvered and found a way to get Derek Brassard. And I think there are ways to acquire a third line center where they've got the top 2 set.
It's a lot easier to get a third line center than would be to get a top 4D. I'll give you that. So keeping Jake Gardner would be ideal.
Yeah.
But losing Panarin after this season,
does Panarin virtually guarantee that's a Toronto Tampa Bay matchup that is as even can go, Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the Montreal Canadiens, who have they've also been quite a surprise. They are sitting at 8-13-5, but are a -3 goal differential. So, what does Montreal need in order to maybe clinch themselves in that playoff spot? Right now, they're sitting right on the bubble. The Islanders 3 points behind them with 2 games in hand would knock Montreal out of the playoffs. And so, what does Montreal need here?
A little better Carey Price. 905 save percentage right now, which is below league average, but I think the team is up front, forward-wise. They've been surprising, producing a lot better, and I think they've gotten a lot more comfortable back there with Shea Weber back. He's ripping the puck now, which is fantastic to watch. He looks like the old Shea Weber ripping the puck back there, which is great for Carey Price, great for the league. However, I think just Carey Price can tune it up a little bit, be a little better. This team would definitely be able to hold on, I think, to a bubble spot.
Yeah, I mean, that's their Christmas present, was getting Shea Weber back nice and early,
sure.
Right? And I say yes, of course. Carey Price is better. This, it's only going to help this team, but I don't think Carey Price is better than this. I think that I think it's just he has shown over the last 3 years that this is who he is now, a middling goaltender.
And look at Halak, who's ripping it in Boston.
Right. And is there a way to get it back? Sure. But at this point, Carey Price looks like something needs to change in his game. And so to me, that's just, you're just kind of stuck with who he is. Maybe he can get that up to a 91% save percentage. But this team, to me, just enjoy where you are and see what happens down the stretch. Don't make any moves. You don't need to do anything. If this team doesn't make the playoffs, it's not a disappointment because we didn't think they would make it anyways.
Yeah, there you go.
The New York. Sorry.
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah.
There you go.
Beautiful.
So the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'll go first here.
Please.
The Penguins, to me, have been wildly inconsistent. They just don't look like the Penguins that we've been used to over the last few years. Granted, 3 years ago, they struggled early on by January, they were not in the playoffs, and they ended up going and winning the Stanley Cup. And so, does this team have the firepower to go and really turn things around? Absolutely. This is another team where outside of their really like their top, a little more than their top line, they're getting some production from Hornqvist, and obviously you've got Crosby and Malkin plugging away. And for all the stuff about, Phil Kessel struggled, he's averaging more than a point per game. And so it's not like he's doing all that bad. I think you just need to see a Derek Brassard start producing. And if he can't, then you need to make a move.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, if I'm Pittsburgh, I got to say, I might want to start pulling the plug on Matt Murray at some point.
Yeah, he has. He's looked pretty bad. I mean, he's only started 13 games. I mean, Casey DeSmith has really almost become this team's starter.
Yeah, but I mean, de facto. I mean, so do you go out and find a team maybe like a Carolina who could use a starting goaltender? Maybe you say, hey, take Matt Murray, a guy who's shown he can backstop a team to the Stanley Cup. Maybe he catches fire, in Carolina. Maybe you can just, maybe you can get something out of him, because I think they wouldn't mind. Pittsburgh wouldn't mind either getting a defenseman or even, some bottom six production. So maybe you can try to flip that for something.
I don't think they're trading Matt Murray.
I don't think so either. But
him that quick. He's only 22 years old, 23 years old. I think that you go, hey, the beginning of your career you were great, and maybe you came really easy. Now let's work on this. We know we can get you back here.
Yeah.
So that to me, you can't give up on Matt Murray yet, because if Matt Murray leaves and in a year he is up for the Vezina, you're going to look real stupid. Okay, let's go to the Edmonton Oilers, who have seen a good little turnaround. 6-3-1 in their last 10. They are now hanging on to a playoff spot, but lost their last two. Lost 4-1 to St. Louis, which not many teams lose to St. Louis, let alone 4-1. So,
right.
This Oilers team, we've talked at length about what this team needs, but what maybe in now the Ken Hitchcock era of this team, what would Ken Hitchcock like to have?
They need a defenseman's defenseman. And I only say that too because Darnell Nurse is going to be out for a long time.
He may miss the season.
Right. So you need somebody who can step back in there and kind of solidify that back end a little bit more. I don't think that's Adam Larson or Clefbaum. I think those guys do have some, they're all right defensemen, but you need somebody who can come in there and solidify that back end. Now, again, that might be a guy like, you can get on the cheap like a Jay Bomeister, a guy who has proven in the past he can do that. A guy who in the last few years in St. Louis has been a little bit more of a defensive guy, and so maybe you go out and get a guy like that, or Braden Coburn out of Tampa Bay, who is kind of sitting there in that third line. But
not gonna.
No, they're not gonna get rid of him. But I'm just spitballing ideas here. I think.
Yeah, I think for Edmonton, you're on the right track with St. Louis, but I think that it needs to go more along the lines of a Parayko or a Pietrangelo, and I think that you do everything you need to do to go and acquire that player.
Yeah, I just worry about them. For one, I don't think they have really the pieces to go out and get a guy like that. I think now you're going to start ripping into their future a little bit too much.
You've got a Yamamoto sitting there. You've got Jesse Puljujarvi, and can you leverage those guys to go look? Like, it just really hasn't worked out here for those guys, but maybe a St. Louis would be willing to take a flyer on one of those guys if a first-round pick also comes to them. I mean, to me, this team has to acquire a defenseman. Right, and so a first round pick is probably on the docket, and that first round pick is going to be pretty valuable. I think even if they make the playoffs, they're still probably going to lose in the first round. So it is going to be in maybe the 16 to 22 mark of the draft, and so it's still a decent pick. And maybe you'd like Edmonton to acquire a player. You need something now. You can't wait for 4 years down the road when, Connor McDavid is past his insane years and he's slowing down ever so slightly. Like, you need to go for it. You need to go for this now. You need to make something happen. And so you got to do something ballsy and something where you're actually acquiring a player that's very good and still in their prime. So,
well, okay.
That's the Edmonton Oilers. Let's go to the New York Islanders.
The Islanders. Wow. Well, you touched on it a little bit when you talked about moving a a Jordan Eberle, I think now would be a good time to see what you can get from him, because I think they got a lot of older players here, guys who they've just brought in to fill in spaces like
for
Komarov,
sure. Yep.
Filppula, and I think maybe now you try to acquire some assets. I think because you want to. I think over the next, I don't want to say you're not going to rebuild, but you want to kind of retool, reshuffle a little bit on the fly here. And I think maybe trying to get some pieces for what you can, because I don't think Jordan Eberle comes back next year. So with the pieces you do have in place, like Barzell, Josh Bailey, get some decent prospects, some picks, so that you can build around those guys here over the next couple of years really quick. And maybe, make them into a decent playoff team next year.
I think you look to move a Cal Clutterbuck.
Okay.
I think Cal Clutterbuck's a guy that I would say, all right, we're gonna move on from this player. He has a reputation in the league for being a guy who can hit, and there are teams who will pay for a guy foolishly who can hit.
Yes.
And so I think you go out and you try to deal him, even if it's for a mid-level pick. You just cut ties with Cal Clutterbuck, and you begin to get away from that, we're just going to hit at all costs type of player, and you start moving into an era where guys are getting fast. You have a Barzell. Build around Barzell and his ability to blow by guys. You need other players who are fast. You need to dump a Cal Clutterbuck, and that's where I'd start. Vancouver Canucks.
This team got a lot of interesting prospects, a lot of young guys. So for me, I think this team just tries to acquire more pieces. Move guys, maybe it's an Alex Edler, if he's willing to move anyways. Move some of those other pieces. What other pieces you can move to acquire assets. And by assets, I mean draft picks, more prospects, because, they've got Quentin Hughes coming up. They've got, a lot of good, just young players. They've got a couple good goaltenders, Demko, DiPietro coming up that could solidify that goaltending that's always been troublesome for them since they got rid of Luongo and Schneider. And
and a player we haven't talked about is Michael Delzato, who would be a great, bottom pairing addition to a guy who can move the puck. He can skate pretty well, and a decent guy in the locker room. Has been used to playing on lots of different teams, so
yes, he has.
he could be a decent little moving piece there for the Canucks, and a free agent at the end of the year. Okay, the Dallas Stars, a team that I think expects to make the playoffs and yet finds themselves on the outside looking in. Obviously, I think for Jim Nill, it's playoffs or you're getting fired.
Yeah, at this point, I think.
So Jim Nill's going to do something to get his team into the playoffs, and what should it be?
It's got to be a top six forward. I think you have to go out and acquire some scoring because, or maybe even a top four defenseman. But I think top six forward would be more ideal right now. I think like a Jordan Eberle, somebody who can come in there and produce a little bit for you, because I hate seeing them rely so much on Ben, Sagan, and Radulov. Spets has been nice. He's been decent. But maybe you try to get somebody else so you can shuffle things up a little bit more if you need to have a little bit more balance in your top six.
An interesting player, too. Marcus Johansson and Matt Zuccarello.
I like Zuccarello.
Two players that are UFAs at the end of the year, and two players that could fit into a lineup where, hey, if you need to split up Ben and Sagan, you need to give them players to play with. And so, one of them gets Radulov, and if the other one were to, let's say, get Matt Zuccarello, that could look real good on them. And Matt Zuccarello has kind of struggled, and he's also been hurt this year. 20 points, or 20 games, 12 points. So maybe an easier guy to acquire than he would have been in the past. And you can cut ties with him at the end of the year if you want to. So
there you go.
Let's go to the Minnesota Wild, who we've already talked about a little bit, but Wild also. I do you think that they are really desperate to make the playoffs, or is this a team that's just going to go, if we're not going to make the playoffs, let's just not make the playoffs?
Yeah,
with Paul Fenton in there now, and
I think you're at the point where you have to pick one or the other, right? And I think if you're picking not making the playoffs, right, you have to try to, I guess, just acquire some young pieces, because you've got a lot of guys on this team that you expected to be so good that just haven't really panned out, like Charlie Coyle. Niederreiter hasn't really been there either. And, how long can you really rely on, Zach Parise and Ryan Suter to really carry this team? And, I think at some point you just have to realize, okay, we're not making the playoffs, because I don't think they will. So you have to say, okay, well, we gotta dump Eric Stahl and get what we can out of him. And I think they can get a decent return out of him. But,
sure.
Teams who maybe could use a top six guy outside of, just this season would be willing to pay a little bit more for Charlie Coyle, who at $3.2 million isn't that expensive to acquire. So
yeah, exactly. You can definitely fit. I mean, both those guys, Stahl and Coyle, you could fit both of them under your cap very easily. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this team does if there's a lockout, because Zach Parise, he may look good in a nice little buyout. I don't think that they'd buy out a Ryan Suter, but Zach Parise has just been. I mean, I think it's probably more likely that they don't buy out Zach Parise and that he eventually just goes on to LTIR.
Oh yeah,
because he's got all these back problems, right? And so we know probably eventually those are going to catch up with him, and that'll be what causes him to retire. I do think though you could re-sign Eric Stahl, hang on to Charlie Coyle, and it's Nino Niederreiter that needs to go. He has shown that he can produce, but he isn't doing it with this team anymore. And so a fresh start, yes, he does have 4 years, or well, after this season, 3 years left of $5.25 million. But I think that he could turn his game around and he could still get you maybe something. You know, he still probably has some value around the league. And he can, I think, still drive a line. So
yeah, and I think maybe the next team on our list could be a good fit for him. Maybe if you want to start rebuilding some depth there at the fourth position. That's
a nice idea. So, if you could, maybe you send a Nino Niederreiter one way, and then if Matt Zuccarello doesn't want to re-sign, you kind of flip those two players. You get them both a fresh start, and if Minnesota can cut ties at the end of the year and maybe acquire picks.
Pavel Buchnevich, maybe get him out of that deal.
Although I don't know if the Rangers are going to be willing to give up younger players. That would be the only thing. But if the New York Rangers, they're going to continue on this quote unquote rebuild, I don't even think this is much of a retooling, other than the fact that they have Henrik Lundqvist. I mean, this is a rebuild, and so Nemesnikov to me is the guy that needs to be targeted and leave, and he looks good on a number of teams. But I think that you go out and you look to acquire a high end, not a first round pick, but maybe a second and a third, or second and a fourth, or something like that, and just keep compiling more and more nice players for the Rangers. And so this is a team that's still probably 4 years away from really becoming the powerhouse that they've been, that we got used to in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and so they just got to keep rebuilding. Now let's go to your Detroit Red Wings.
Ooh, speaking of rebuilds, let's talk Detroit. I think this is a team, like we mentioned a couple names, Jimmy Howard, Gustav Nyquist, guys who can get Detroit some decent return pieces, some first-round draft picks. I know Kenny Holland's come out and said he's not willing to part with Jimmy Howard for less than a first-rounder. I'm not sure if that's ideal. I think if you're Detroit, try to get a first-rounder. That'd be great, but maybe take a second and a third if you can for a guy like that, because rumor is Jimmy Howard wants to come back to Detroit, and so maybe you flip both these guys to a team like Carolina, who could use a starting goaltender, could use some top 6 or even top 9 scoring, and get yourself maybe one of their high-priced defensive prospects back in return and start the rebuild quicker.
Now, what about the idea of, okay, let's say you flip Gustav Nyquist, you trade Vanek, who they all have some sort of no move.
But I think if you're willing to trade them to playoff teams, they'd probably waive those.
Let's say you trade all those players. You then maybe could use those assets to acquire other players at the deadline for teams that are looking to move players. And I think the Red Wings are in a really nice position, a position where the Leafs were actually in a position similar to this when they were quite bad. The Red Wings, I think, are ahead of the Leafs when the Leafs finished dead last, and then they got Austin Matthews. The Wings are ahead of them there in terms of, they do have some young talent right now, but they can flip a lot of these UFAs and then take what they just got in the flip and acquire some players who maybe some teams are down on, like a Nino Niederreiter. Like, what if you flipped Howard, you got a first-round pick, and then you went and you turned that first-round pick into Nino Niederreiter?
Hey, all right.
I mean, the Wings have the cap space. If they're able, maybe you're able to deal with Nicholas Kronwall at some point, and then you've got, not only do you have assets for the future, but you have something for now. And maybe Niederreiter is able to regain form and find his game where he was a 50-point player and looked like one of the better left wingers in the National Hockey League.
Yeah, hey, that'd be nice.
Okay, let's go let's go to Ottawa as we've approached the 1 hour mark of the podcast. Hour 4, we'll chug through these last 8 teams. Most of these teams are now, who do these teams need to deal off and start building towards a better tomorrow?
Yeah, I think for Ottawa, their Christmas wish list is to get Stone and Duchesne signed to long-term deals, because I think if you're going to rebuild around any 2 guys, those would be ideal to have just be not only they're good veteran guys because they're still in their prime, but they've been in the league long enough to where they know how to be good veterans. And so guys that still produce just at a tremendous rate. So get those guys signed, then you can start your rebuild process.
Yep, and start thinking about a goaltender.
There you go.
Let's Carolina Hurricanes.
Mentioned it a little earlier. I think still getting top 6, top 9 scoring would be great, and getting a goaltender would be even better. Although I think the goaltender part's going to be a little bit more difficult for them, which is why I think trying to get Detroit to package a guy like Nyquist and Howard in one big package, and maybe you send Jake Bean the other way. Who knows? But
let's say Ottawa's given up on the season, and they go, all right, well, Craig Anderson, would you like to go to Carolina? Carolina acquires Craig Anderson, and maybe they can make a little run here towards the playoffs at the end of the season with a halfway decent goalie.
Right. Yeah, you could do that. And even with a guy like Mike Smith, I think would even be worth taking a chance if you're not really giving up anything more than, say, a 4th, 3rd rounder for him, I would be okay with that.
Okay, let's go to the Philadelphia Flyers, who finally bring up Carter Hart, who wins his first game against, unfortunately, Detroit for you. And I mean, he didn't have to make a whole lot of saves. I think he made 20 saves out of 22.
Yeah.
Gets his first NHL win. What does this team need to, or what's this team going to do? It's not necessarily about needs right now, because they did just fire their GM, and then their GM fired their coach, and that whole debacle that occurred.
Yeah, they fired him in such the wrongest of ways. It was just terrible.
From what I understand, Chuck Fletcher did not leak anything. It was other people inside the organization that leaked that they were going to fire him. Chuck Fletcher was very upset that it went down that way, because Chuck Fletcher is not a guy who would want to screw a guy over like that. I mean, it was a rough little situation for Dave Haxtell. But the Flyers, nonetheless. Maybe last year was more of an anomaly. They went on that crazy run. They lost like 10 in a row, and then they won 100 in a row, and where they went. A lot. I mean, Jordan Weald, Michael Raffel, Wayne Simmons, Yori Laterra, all free agents along with Michael Neuwirth. And so a lot of guys coming off the books. This team maybe should just hit the reset button for next year and go after some free agents like they always have the ability to.
Right.
Use their money to their advantage. Use the ability to sign guys to big signing bonuses because they have the cash.
Right. And I think you could deal a guy like Wayne Simmons maybe to a team like Toronto, right, who could really enjoy his presence on their top 9. Yeah. Sure. But I mean, you could deal him anywhere really, because I think a lot of teams would be more than willing to knock on the door of Chuck Fletcher and be like, hey, we'll take him. We'll take him, because I don't think he re-signs there. And then I think honestly Philly got their Christmas present. Carter Hart coming in, he's looked pretty decent. Hopefully he just continues it for them. Yeah,
but unfortunately I think Carter Hart will eventually get sent back down.
Yeah,
I don't think he's up there to stay. I think they'll get back Alex Lyon, and he'll go back down and keep being the number 1 guy down in the American Hockey League. Let's go to the Florida Panthers, a team that was really expected to at least compete for a playoff spot. Right now, 9 points out of it, a minus 14 goal differential. This team just got blown up by the Leafs, and now they'll take on Detroit tonight. But this team, to me, seems like there's something wrong with this team. Mm-hmm. And yes, when Luongo's playing, they're generally pretty good. But I mean, you even bringing in Mike Hoffman has just not allowed this team defensively to do enough.
No, I think for me,
offensively,
what this team would need more than anything else is a new head coach. Honestly, I think they need a little bit more structure, a guy with a little bit more defensive mindedness to him, like a Ken Hitchcock type guy who can solidify that back end. Maybe Joel Quenneville is a good fit for this team next year.
Wow.
Yeah,
Joel Quenneville going to that small of a market, I just can't see it.
Yeah, I don't either. But I mean, they could use a guy with that kind of experience and that kind of knowledge. Obviously, would be fantastic for them. So for me, that's what I would want if I'm the Florida Panthers. But
I think you need to make a big move, and obviously this team's missing Vinny Trocheck, and so I think as a team and an organization, you're going to go, well, do we really want to blow this team up when we're missing our second center and maybe shoot again for next year, but something needs to change with this team. I think that you either need to look at moving Bukestad, or maybe it's a Jonathan Huberdeau that you need to look into moving, because he's at a reasonable cap hit. You could probably acquire some solid talent from a Huberdeau. I know it sounds crazy to deal one of those guys, in this league where everybody has these, all right, here we have our core and we're going to build around our core. Sometimes one of those players in that core needs to change. So it may be too early. We'll see what happens at the end of the season, but at very least, you're going to trade a Troy Brouwer, a Michael Haley, Alex Petrovic. All these guys are free agents at the end of the year, and so probably you'll look to acquire some draft picks and such for those players. Okay, let's go to the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, poor Corey Crawford again, out with a concussion.
Guy cannot catch a break.
Yeah, that's terrible. And it might be at the point, too, where now you have to start, if you're Corey Crawford, start thinking about your long-term health outside of hockey. And it's getting to the point now where I start to worry that maybe he's going to start contemplating retiring soon. And if that happens, this team is really in trouble. So for me, I don't know. Do you really consider the possibility of saying, hey, Patrick Kane, we could get a king's ransom for you. Do you want to waive your clause so we can move you to a team?
I don't think you're there yet.
Okay.
I don't think you're there yet. I think that you are going to just ride this season. You're going to see what happens with this lockout, because this lockout could really change their fortunes with Brent Seabrook.
Right.
If they're allowed to just buy him out, I think that really starts to move things in the right direction, and they'll have a lot of cap space even next year. I mean, they've got $18 million in cap space with really only a couple guys to re-sign there. You've got Alex DeBrincat for another 2 years at his entry level. And so I think you can start to maybe reshape this team. And in my mind, I think that Bowman gets one more shot at this. He's going to get this offseason and the next, see if he can turn this around. And if he can't, then he'll be fired. Okay, let's go to the New Jersey Devils. 4 more teams. And the New Jersey Devils maybe shot the moon.
On the chopping block? Man, that's a very good question. I think maybe you start looking at...
Well, I mean, you're
Who
going
would you move?
You need to move Ben Lovejoy. Ben Lovejoy was a big part of that Pittsburgh. I think you move him, you can probably get more than you should for him, just because he does have that pedigree, and he will come on cheap in terms of his contract, and Brian Boyle as well. You can, I'm sure, acquire some mid-level draft pick for him.
Yeah, there's always
come in
teams
and
that are
fill in that fourth, third line for.
that are looking for that kind of, and a guy who's very good at the penalty kill, great leadership, and he wins every faceoff too. He's fantastic at that, so that's never discounted come playoff time for sure. So yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Really, I think it's you're trying to look for who is someone willing to take Travis Zajac from you right now.
Boy,
because if you can,
that's difficult.
Just get that salary out of there. Travis Zajac, or even a Kyle Palmieri. I mean, 27 years old. He's got 3 years left on his deal, 2 after this season.
I don't get rid of Kyle Palmieri. He's scoring too many goals right now.
He's scoring a lot of goals. On there, but yeah, you need that next, and Zajac hasn't been that guy. So let's go St. Louis Blues, a team that was expected to be very good in the Central, and they have really fallen off the map. Tarasenko looks like a shell of himself. Who needs to be dealt on this team aside from
the coach?
Aside from Patrick Maroon, who's a free agent at the end of the year. Jay Bouwmeester, also a free agent at the end of the year. I mean, you can; those are easy ones. I'm looking at Alex Steen and going, this is a guy that this team should be fighting to move, eat some of his salary if you need to, and we'll see what happens with this next lockout too. I mean, there's always some options there.
That's tough.
Bozak at $5 million, not looking so good anymore, is it?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, you have to move Pietrangelo or Parenko at some point. I mean, don't you? I think one of those two guys.
I think you're probably going to have to. You can't lose both of them at the end of next season. But okay, let's go Arizona Coyotes.
Ooh,
a team that, man, once again finds themselves at the bottom of the. I mean, I think this has got to be it. Manager, what's his name? I can't think. John something, right? Why can't I think of his name? That's okay. So, I mean, this has been the analytics test, is the way that they've been constructing their team, and it just doesn't seem to be working at all.
No, and
John Chaika, there you go.
Chaika, yep. He they definitely miss like a top six forward who can drive production. Like your Taylor Halls, your Artemi Panarin's, somebody who can come in there and really just drive a top line for them, because I think they've got a good back end, they've got good goaltending when healthy, although that does seem to be the problem. So
let's see, Clayton Keller is not as good as I think they were hoping that he would be.
No, and he's still young enough.
He's good. He's still good, but he's not going to be the top guy who drives the whole line from the wing.
And don't get me wrong, I still think there's time for him to maybe regain form. He could be, your 60, 70 point player, which would be fine. But I think they made too many plays on guys like, Derek Stepan, Hinostroza, Grabner, guys, Galchenyuk, guys who they thought could come in and regain form and just, play better than they've shown they have been with their previous teams. And I think it just kind of blown up in their faces a little bit. And maybe that's because they're looking too much on the analytical side and forgetting about that good old eye test. So.
Yep, that's fair. Okay, let's go. Last team in the NHL. We've made it. Let's go with the LA Kings.
LA, wow. Boy, they need a whole bunch of stuff. But I think it's time to move Jeff Carter.
Yep, I agree. That's exactly who I would say. Yep. Jeff Carter all the way.
Yep, move him, get some younger pieces, see what you can do, because no team's taking Dustin Brown in his contract right now. You're definitely not dealing Kopitar, so I think Jeff Carter is probably your next big trade piece.
Yeah, and the Kovalchuk signing is looking a little suspect. You could deal an Alec Martinez, but I think he makes a little too much, and so you'd have to probably eat some of his salary.
Yeah, Jake Muzzin wouldn't be a bad move either. I think he'd be okay. Looking at a lot of teams again who need defensive defensemen back there, Jake Muzzin could be a guy who could step in there and you could get a decent, maybe get a third round and a prospect, a second round pick for him maybe. We'll see if that plays out, how desperate teams get. But yeah, for me, Jeff Carter's the big move to bring in a young piece.
All right, sounds great. Well, that is all 31 NHL teams and what they need for Christmas.
Show 100.
Show number 100. Thanks for making these first 100 episodes great, and we will talk to you over the next 100. Cheers.